This video is for all you young whippersnappers out there who don't understand how great Stan Musial really was. In the city of St. Louis, Stan Musial is an absolute legend. He holds at least 25 franchise records for the St. Louis Cardinals, and his statue outside Busch Stadium has been a part of Cardinals fandom for over 50 years. In fact, Musial is regarded so highly in St. Louis that when people started calling Albert Pujols El Hombre back in 2010, Pujols quickly shut that down, saying, quote, "I don't want to be called that. There is one man that gets that respect, and that's Stan Musial. He's the man." So, where does Stan Musial rank among the greatest hitters of all time? When you dig into the numbers, I think you can make a very good case that Musial is a top 10 hitter all time. In case you think I'm crazy, let's start by looking at where Musial has ranked on some lists that have come out over the years. If you exclude pitchers from these lists, ESPN ranked Musial as the 9th greatest position player of all time in 2022. The Athletic ranked him as the 8th greatest position player of all time in 2020, and Bleacher Report also ranked him 9th in 2017. And this is all in spite of the fact that Musial ranks 34th all-time in batting average, 25th in on-base percentage, 21st in slugging percentage, 17th in OPS, and 20th in OPS+. So if the slash numbers only indicate a top 20-ish hitter of all time, what is it about Stan Musial that pushes him into the top 10? First, let's look at some of the basics. Musial ranks 8th all-time among hitters in Baseball Reference WAR with 128.5, and he ranks 10th all-time in Fangraphs WAR with 126.4, and his 125.1 offensive WAR ranks 6th. Musial ranks 3rd all-time in runs created, 6th in adjusted batting runs, 5th in adjusted batting wins, and 8th in win probability added. And what about just the classic counting stats? He ranks 10th all-time in runs scored, 4th in hits, 3rd in total bases, 4th in extra base hits, 3rd in doubles, 8th in runs batted in, and 3rd in intentional walks. Next, let's talk hardware. Where does Musial rank in MVP voting numbers? Musial won the National League MVP award in 1943, 1946, and 1948. He's one of only 11 players in history who've won the award 3 times. But this isn't even the most impressive number for Musial when it comes to MVP voting. On top of his 3 wins, he also finished 2nd in MVP voting 4 more times. He finished 4th once, 5th once, 6th once, 8th twice, 9th once, and 10th once, for a total of 14 years finishing in the top 10 in MVP voting. And he picked up down ballot votes in 4 more years on top of that. All in all, Musial ranks 2nd all-time in total MVP vote shares for his career, behind only Barry Bonds, and just ahead of fellow Cardinal legend Albert Pujols. And along with the MVP voting, All-Star voting is further evidence of Musial's consistent greatness. Musial is tied for 2nd all-time in most seasons appearing in the All-Star game. Willie Mays and Musial both appeared in the All-Star game in 20 different seasons, behind only Hank Aaron at 21 seasons. Next, let's look at Musial's 1948 MVP season, which is one of the greatest single seasons of all time. At age 28, Musial missed the Triple Crown by just 1 home run, and he put up career highs in basically every major offensive category. His ridiculous 429 total bases in 1948 are good for the 6th most all-time in a single season. His total WAR of 11.3 is tied for 14th all-time, and 6th most all-time for anyone not named Babe Ruth or Barry Bonds. TheScore.com ranked Musial's 48 season as the 9th greatest MVP season of all time, and Bleacher Report ranked it as the 2nd greatest MVP season of all time. And one more fun little tidbit about Musial's 1948 season, if you take his numbers and actually round them down a little bit, he's one of only 3 players ever with a season with 220 hits, 35 home runs, 120 RBIs, a .360 batting average, and 200 OPS+. Rogers Hornsby and Lou Gehrig are the only other 2 players in history to post those numbers. Next, let's look at Musial's 1962 season, which is undoubtedly one of the best single seasons of all time for anyone age 41 or older. At age 41, Musial was still raking, finishing 10th in MVP voting with a .330 average, a .924 OPS, and a .137 OPS+. For all players age 41 or over, Musial's 3.6 WAR ranks 4th all-time, his 26 adjusted batting runs ranks 2nd all-time, and his 137 OPS plus ranks 1st all-time for players with at least 500 plate appearances. So I think you can make an argument that Musial's 1962 season might actually be the greatest old man season of all time. Next, let's look at some Bill James metrics. Baseball Reference has a Hall of Fame statistics section at the bottom of each player's page. The site states, "These metrics are designed by Bill James to measure how likely a player is to get into the Hall of Fame." First up among these metrics, we have the Hall of Fame standards. Basically, this metric takes lots of different stats into account to measure the overall quality of a player's career. On this metric, the average Hall of Famer has a score of 50. For example, you have Rickey Henderson with a score of 53, Roberto Clemente with a score of 51, and Yogi Berra with a score of 49. Musial's score of 76 is tied with Willie Mays and Rogers Hornsby for 4th all-time. The next Bill James metric we'll look at is the Hall of Fame Monitor. This one tallies up not only stats, but also some awards and achievements like MVPs and Gold Gloves to determine how likely it is a player will reach the Hall of Fame. On this one, a likely Hall of Famer is a score of 100, while a score of 130 is a virtual lock to get into Cooperstown. Unless you're Don Mattingly, that is. Again, some Hall of Fame examples: Jeff Bagwell has a score of 150, Barry Larkin sits at 121, and Fred McGriff has a score of 100. And Musial's score of 452, yes, I said 452, is the highest score of all time in the Hall of Fame Monitor, just above Ty Cobb at 445 and Hank Aaron at 421. So in other words, according to this metric, Stan Musial is the absolute most shining example in all of history of what a Hall of Fame career looks like. Next, we have the black ink test. This is a system that measures how often a player led their respective league in major stats. The average Hall of Famer has a black ink score of 27. Freddie Freeman, a guy who's probably a Hall of Famer if he retires today, has a black ink score of 25. Bryce Harper, just serving as a random example of a great player, is sitting at 19. Musial's black ink score of 116 is good for 7th all-time, just behind Ted Williams and just ahead of Honus Wagner. And the last Bill James Hall of Fame stat is the gray ink test. It's essentially the same as black ink, except it looks at how many times a player finished in the top 10 in their league. The average Hall of Famer has a gray ink score of 144. Freeman and Harper are sitting at 167 and 108 respectively. Musial's gray ink score of 390 is good for 4th all-time. And I think Musial's brilliance in these gray ink and black ink scores deserve a moment to show how insane his career really was. This is how many times Musial finished top 10 in the National League in the following categories. Batting average, 17 seasons, 3rd most all-time. On-base percentage, 17 seasons, 4th most all-time, etc., etc. As you can see, he's the all-time leader in most seasons, finishing in the top 10 in total bases, doubles, extra base hits, base out runs, and base out wins. Basically, Musial spent 17 years as a top 10 player in the National League. But Musial wasn't only a top 10 guy. He spent many seasons as the best hitter in the National League. Here's how many times Musial led the league in the same categories. He led the NL in runs created, adjusted batting runs, and offensive win percentage 9 times each. So he spent nearly a decade as the most productive hitter in the National League. Next, let's look at some random stats that I dug up on StatHead, but they're some of my favorite Musial numbers. Because Musial was so wildly consistent for such a long time, I did a few searches to see who had the most seasons with truly elite numbers. Most seasons with an OPS plus of 150 or higher. Musial's 13 seasons are tied for 2nd most all time. Most seasons with 300 or more total bases. Musial's 13 seasons are also tied for 2nd most all time. And what about most seasons with an OPS of 900 or higher? Musial's 16 seasons are tied with Hank Aaron for the absolute most all time. And finally, let's take into account that Musial missed the entire 1945 season due to his service in the U.S. Navy during World War II. Much like Ted Williams and Joe DiMaggio, Musial missed time in the prime of his career for the war. Just for fun, let's imagine what Musial's career totals could have looked like if he had played in 1945. Here are Musial's season averages from 1943 to 1947, the 2 years before his military service and the 2 years after. If you assume he would have posted similar numbers in 1945, here are his new career totals. So if Musial had played in 1945, a reasonable guess is that he jumps from 10th all-time to 8th all-time in runs scored, he jumps from 4th to 3rd all-time in hits, and he jumps to 2nd all-time in doubles, 6th in RBIs, 2nd in total bases, and 6th in WAR. So, all these numbers serve to say that Stan Musial has a great case as a top 10 hitter of all time, or at the very least, he belongs in the discussion. And if you're the kind of person who looks at sustained excellence to determine greatness, then Stan Musial is your guy. Again, he put up about 15 years as a top 5 player in the NL, and about 17 or 18 years as a top 10 player. That's an insane amount of consistent greatness that we've only seen from a handful of other players in history. Yet somehow, Musial's greatness feels like it's been overshadowed a bit over the years. This could partly be because Musial played for a small market team. If he had played in New York or LA, I think you'd hear about him a lot more. But it could also be partly because Musial is not only known for being a great baseball player. A big part of the legend of Stan the Man is that he was also just a great person. You can go down a serious YouTube rabbit hole just listening to stories about Musial's kindness and generosity. Similar to Yogi Berra and how his reputation as a fun, lovable old man that you see in the commercials sort of overshadowed his actual work on the field, I think the human aspect of Musial's legend might overshadow his accomplishments on the field a little bit. Whatever the case, hopefully this video helps younger fans and future generations understand that Stan Musial truly was the man.